I've been meaning to make this video for actual years now. Better late than never. Welcome, Hidden Ones, Assassins. I'm Eivor of Alamut, and while you may think my favorite game then is Valhalla or Mirage, both would be a fair guess. They are in my top 5, but fun fact, my favorite game is actually Origins. Anyway, I've been a fan of Assassin's Creed since 2009, my first game then being Assassin's Creed 2. And I'll never forget first seeing the cover of the game at GameStop back in the day and immediately being pulled in by Ezio's character design. And then seeing that my favorite artist, Leonardo da Vinci, was a character, I just had to play it. Not having a console to play it on at the time, I took my opportunity when one day my cousin, who had an Xbox, asked me if I'd see any interesting games. I told him either Bayonetta or Assassin's Creed 2 looked pretty cool, and guess which one he picked? From the moment I first played as Ezio, I was in love. I became obsessed. That obsession has stayed with me since then, and Assassin's Creed is my favorite thing ever. It means the world to me. So, here I am. My goal with this channel is to try to make a more positive gaming space, especially with Assassin's Creed. I will talk about other things here and there, I'm sure, but my main goal is to talk anything and everything Assassin's Creed. Do a deep dive on each game individually. Books, comics, what have you. This first video is just a broad overview of everything, the series as a whole, and how the internet seems to react to it. Things like that. Hopefully this will be interesting to you and not just me. I'm going to try to keep things as brief as I can, but when I talk about Assassin's Creed I tend to go on and on. This video is more going to focus on the fan community. There could be a whole separate video made on the company practice type stuff, and this is how you never get Ubisoft to notice you, but it needs to be said. I love the creatives at Ubisoft. I think they have some of the best devs in the game. I mean, I'm such a fangirl for people like Darby McDevitt, and even some of the concept artists they hire. But that's the thing. I love the creatives. Ubisoft as a company, not so much. I really don't like the execs, the higher-ups that control everything, that put a chokehold on the devs and make them go against what they want. These higher-ups who refuse to make a safe environment for these talented people, they're awful. And so many problems I see people complain about with Ubisoft has to do with them, or the choices they made that the devs had to follow. So keep in mind for this channel, we stand the devs and hate the suits. I do want the company to change for the better, for people to come together and try to do something about it. But instead we see some absolute freak fans make a petition to remove Yasuke from Shadows, which, by the way, to those guys, they're delusional and racist. They're doing nothing but whining at their basement walls. With that being said, I think it's better if I talk about things I'm more knowledgeable in, the Assassin's Creed series itself. This is still important to me as a person, and I still see some nutty stuff out there. So with that all out of the way, let's get into it. The Assassin's Creed community is full of very loud and very opinionated gamers, we'll just call them, always trying to convince people in one way or another why old good, new bad. For those who are lucky enough to be out of the loop, that phrase basically meaning that only the old games are good while the new games are bad. But the goalpost moves with the years. When Black Flag was new, it was hated for just being a bad Assassin's Creed game but a good pirate game. At least that was the highest praise it would receive at the time. Today though, you ask any gamer about Black Flag and it is now the peak of the franchise. Weird how as time moves forward, new things become older, and with that, in a sense of nostalgia becomes attached to it. In any case, gamers will try to make arguments as to why the newer Assassin's Creed games, basically Origins onward, are bad or even wilder, try to explain why they are not even Assassin's Creed games. A point they may make on that latter argument is, why are there no assassins in my Creed? This tends to be a very common one, at least. I mean, I once even ran across a video titled something along the lines of, what's in a name? And like, I remember starting the video and simply just struggling to finish it because of its content. So like, forgive me for not going back to double check this one. So while I can't even remember what was said exactly in said video, I could still easily catch on to the main argument, which was, the series is called Assassin's Creed, therefore each game should be about an assassin. Which on paper may make sense to some of you, and I wouldn't blame you for it either. For me though, I find this a little shallow. I mean, what happens when the devs, the creatives, want to simply explore the Assassin's Creed world? Origins, Odyssey, Valhalla, Rogue to an extent, and yes, this would include Black Flag. After all, while the Assassins and Templars were prominent in the game, Ed himself didn't officially become an assassin until the very end of the game. The whole game you're being a pseudo-assassin of sorts till then. With the pseudo-assassin angle in mind, that means Black Flag is very similar, oddly enough, to Valhalla. The difference being that Eivor turned down being a hidden one because of her culture, while Ed did take up being an assassin. If you wanted to push this idea further, even Origins could follow it too. At the end of the day, the only black sheep of the franchise is Odyssey, but even then, you still have the story about a cult who at one point wanted to make a change, became corrupt, and then met its end at the hand of a lone mercenary. This is just showing that the ideals for the Hidden Ones and Assassins have persisted over time. They're constantly being burnt down and rebuilt. The reason the story of Odyssey, Origins, and Valhalla work so well in the series is because the main overarching theme since day one has been humanity. It has always been about people fighting for what they believe is right against insurmountable odds, knowing that failure is probably imminent, but doing it anyway, or at least trying to make the world a better place. The Hidden Ones and Assassins have been burnt to ash countless times over, but each time they've been able to pull themselves out of the ashes and endure. Assassins Creed at its very core has always been this story of humanity, about how we as humans have been intertwined for thousands of years, how we persisted through at times that just may seem impossible just to try to make a change we deem worth changing. And I think that's why even when there's a game with no assassins, it just doesn't bother me. I mean, thinking about my own personal criteria as to what makes an Assassin's Creed game an Assassin's Creed game, I think of things like storytelling and ambiance and music, things that when they come together just give me that feeling of home that I always turn back to. Assassin's Creed at its core is a story about us, humans. We're all flawed and complex creatures with differing opinions. Speaking of, subjectivity is an important thing to understand when having these types of conversations. And this tends to be another issue running around gamer circles. At least I'd say it's an issue. We are all entitled to our own opinions, and there's nothing wrong with disagreeing either, but I think there's a point to be made. Just because you personally don't like something doesn't mean it's bad. Good and bad are terribly subjective, and to state something you don't personally like as bad, I think is a disservice, or at least it certainly makes for a poor discussion point. So let's use Valhalla for this example. I would make the case that Valhalla is technically not a bad game. You can play it, the game has a cohesive story, the gameplay functions, etc., etc. So on a technical level, we can say it's acceptable, satisfactory, or whatever. At this point we can, hopefully, agree that it lives in a neutral state. I played the game and I personally loved it. I would make the argument it's a good game, but if you played it and didn't like it because of whatever personal reason, that is okay. It is okay to just say, it personally just wasn't for me. When you say X game is bad, then go on an online crusade to try and convince everyone X game is bad, that's where you lose me. Especially when a lot of reasoning gamers use is just down to personal taste. Kinda like if I went, I don't like turn-based combat video games, therefore Pokemon is bad, or something like that. Maybe it's just me, but when I hear someone say X thing is good, and then tells me why, that comes across a lot better than X thing is bad, and I need to convince you. I am allowed to enjoy things. You don't have to enjoy those things. I just don't get why, at the end of the day, we can't just leave it at that. Maybe I just don't personally understand the way gamers seemingly go out of their way to play something they clearly don't enjoy anymore. Why waste your time seething over something when you could be doing something that makes you happy? I just find that subjectivity is important to keep in mind. I mean, if you're coming to my channel, I'm going to assume you probably hold similar enough opinions to me. And even if you don't love all the Assassin's Creed games, like I do, at least you like them enough to come in some capacity to hear me make my case. I mean, these games have been around for over 15 years now. They're going to change and evolve with the times. From where I stand, gamers are seemingly static, clinging to the past and perhaps even clinging to the way they felt back then when they first played the older games, which is a shame because I think the future of Assassin's Creed still has a lot of potential. Speaking of the future, the next Assassin's Creed game is already coming out later this year. Assassin's Creed Shadows is set in Japan around the late 1500s and has been a setting people have been begging for since about forever now. To be completely honest with you though, I personally never wanted the Japan setting. It was just never the most appealing to me personally, and plus I found it a bit on the nose. I'm only saying that because most people want Assassin's Creed with ninjas thinking it'd be perfect. I mean, I once had a conversation with a man where he expressed how he wanted the Japan setting because ninjas were the OG assassins, and I didn't have to explain to him that the OG assassins were in fact the Hashashins, and That's what the series has been based around since day one. That's why we have Altair. He, of course, didn't like my answer, but what are you gonna do? Besides, from my understanding, I've been told ninjas were more like spies than stealth killers. But getting back on track, we're getting Shadows. The game was announced during Assassin's Creed Big 15th year celebration as codename Red, and I was immediately disappointed, but I can concede. Let the people have what they want. Like, I'm not really invested in Victorian England era, but yet I still love Syndicate. Soon after Red was announced, rumors began to appear. Rumors of the possibility of a historical figure named Yasuke being the protagonist of the game. And let me tell you, this piqued my interest. I so hoped the rumors were true. To experience Japan through the eyes of someone new to the country and its culture, I thought was such a smart move. A more interesting angle for something like this. Plus, he's such a fascinating historical character, even for what little we do know about him. Luckily for me, the rumors turned out to be true, and unlucky for all of us is that this unleashed a swarm of absolutely unhinged gamers. For those of you who don't know, though it feels like the absolute degenerate response has become bigger than the game announcement itself, gamers are in a rage over Yasuke. Why? Simple. They're racist. Okay. Well, that is true, and we could honestly leave it at that. Maybe some of you want to hear what exactly has been going on to understand that point. Let's see. We have such things as non-Japanese men pretending to be Japanese online to show how much Yasuke makes the Japanese people angry. And then in an interview on the streets of Japan, trying to find one soul that is angry with Yasuke, only to find that no one is upset, and instead has to interview his own cameraman because said cameraman is the only one that agrees with him. There's been post after post of disgusting anti-black sentiments, and to make a quick edit here, since I first wrote this script, so much more has happened with the drama around Shadows that I now plan to make a whole separate video diving into detail about it all, including the statement made by Ubisoft. But to get back on track, these anti-black sentiments are unfortunately a common occurrence in online gaming spaces that do need to change, and I sincerely hope we can change it. This isn't even the first time we've seen horrible statements like this. We've seen gamers getting mad at black characters in ancient Greece with Odyssey, despite it being well known that ancient people traveled across the Mediterranean. Same sort of thing with Valhalla with Vaughn, the NPC in charge of the River Raid game mode, and Origins just being skipped over completely. Disgusting behavior like this has always been around, but this is the worst I've personally seen it. These sorts of statements are very prevalent on Twitter or in certain spaces on Reddit, but speaking of Reddit, the subreddit r/gaming circle jerk has a good catalog of this gamer rage. But besides the point, I'd argue that a part of this backlash is so bad because of this sort of fetishization of Japan that we see in these sorts of online spaces. They for some reason feel robbed of being able to play as a Japanese samurai, despite being okay with games like Nioh, a game where you play as a European samurai. It's weird, right? I'm not sure why they'd feel so upset over not playing as a Japanese protagonist when the other lead for Shadows is a Japanese native named Naoe. Not only that, but she's a ninja! Well, actually a shinobi. Ninja, as I've come to learn, is just the Chinese word for shinobi, as far as I understand. So yes, shinobi, but that still means we get a stealth-based character. So, Naoe checks all the boxes and oh, no, wait. She doesn't count either because she's a woman, and yes, sexism is a problem here too. Who would have thought? Funny enough, for the longest time, Naoe was kept out of the outrage altogether. I mean, most gamers/armchair historians are still pressed over Yasuke. Yes, I said armchair historian. I think now's the best time we bring them into this. Most of these gamer types also tend to fall into this category. Like the Venn diagram might as well be a circle. For those who may not understand the term, an armchair historian is a guy who enjoys history but is by no means an expert in it. What sets them apart from other history enjoyers is the self-credited authority, that their word is absolute and to not be challenged. Also, they tend to never take in new information that we've learned. History in the past to them is an unwavering, immovable thing that cannot be changed even when new evidence emerges. Now, I bring this up with Yasuke because of the arguments surrounding him saying that he wasn't a samurai. The most common claim you may see online is that, no, he wasn't a samurai, he was just a retainer. And keep in mind that this isn't my area of expertise, but from what I've looked up, quote, a retainer refers to a vassal in feudal Japan, usually a samurai providing military services. So even if samurai had different ranks amongst themselves, it would seem that a retainer is still considered a full samurai. Some still may argue this point, and I think a lot of confusion may still come from the conflating knights and samurai. Some confusion may come in thinking a retainer is more like a knight's squire when that really isn't the case. And while Japan did have a caste system, there was still room for some lateral mobility during the Warring States period, which is the time period Shadows is being set in. Meanwhile, knights were basically born into knighthood through their lineage or through family ties, with rare few exceptions. While the majority of samurai may have been born into it, you would still see peasants or even wealthy merchants be able to raise a fighting force and then be gifted with the title of samurai. This means that Yasuke was a samurai based on what we know a samurai to be. I'm sure this won't stop the bitter man-children though. Unfortunate, but to be expected. They are just as immovable and rigid as their view of history. I'd like to maybe change a few minds, or at least open the door to have a more constructive conversation. I suppose I'm just wary. I mean, in an attempt for arguing supposed historical accuracy, I've seen a comment on a video go as far as to say Yasuke was fictional, a myth, which is just nuts, as so many of these absurd arguments tend to stem from a singular point of alleged historical accuracy. This is a long-running bit against Assassin's Creed that gamers love to use. At this point, just hearing the phrase is utterly exhausting. Let's just cut right into this one. There is no such thing as historical accuracy. An odd thing to say, but hear me out. Historical accuracy is not a thing and will never be a thing until we build time machines or something. And since we don't have time machines yet, then yes, historical accuracy will continue to elude us. There's just no way to accurately know what happened in the past. Even with all the research and discoveries made, in most cases we're still only scratching the surface of how life might have actually been in any era of the world. So hearing the incessant whining about how things aren't historically accurate is just nauseating. Especially when, more often than not, gamers use the phrase to describe bits of history that they just don't like. I've never seen it used as an actual critique. They just don't seem to know what they're talking about. I say that because as Assassin's Creed went on throughout the years, it became more well known, more of an established series, meaning that over time the devs were able to hire on more credible historians and get better insight into the time periods of their choosing. Therefore, I'd argue that the newer the Assassin's Creed game is, the more historically plausible or historically sound the game is. Since there is no way to be accurate over a historical period, the best thing we can hope for is to take what we do know about said period, apply it, and make whatever piece of media basically a good educated guess. I think Assassin's Creed games excel at showing what the everyday life for people of the past might have looked like, and making the settings feel authentic to whatever time period they're in. The Assassin's Creed games are what I would consider a crash course for different historical periods. A good broad overview. So yes, the Assassin's Creed games, I would say, succeed at being historically plausible. How can the series become more historically plausible as it go on, I hear you ask? The old games were more accurate than these woke new ones. Altair's crossbow was not taken out due to historical accuracy issues. It was removed due to being too OP in-game. In Assassin's Creed 2, you fistfight the Pope. In Brotherhood, the Borgia family is shown to be this soap opera incestuous family, when as far as we know that most likely wasn't the case. For Revelations, we're pretty sure Janissaries didn't wear masks, but hey, the masks were really cool. On top of all that, the series is built around two warring secret cults that even history doesn't know about, fighting over ancient alien technology. Yeah, I think errors to be expected. I mean, jokes aside, yes, some things are going to get tweaked for the series' own internal lore, and for gameplay reasons, and it's fine. Tweaks like this is why I say the games are a good summary or crash course, and not to say all the details aren't reliable. They do have experts to help them after all. For example, since day one, historical assassination targets are often taken out when and where we know them to die in history. So even though the devs do their homework and create these historically sound games, gamers, in their old good, new bad fashion, will still claim that the newer Assassin's Creed games aren't historically accurate, and in fact they go as far as to say the newer games are pure fantasy. A lot of that has to do with sexism, and while I do plan to do a deep dive on each Assassin's Creed game individually and get into subjects like this more in detail, we can run over some points now just so you can get an idea. On the sexism bit, with Odyssey, we're introduced to picking our protagonist's sex, picking between either female or male character, something that only lasts for 2 games. In Odyssey, we pick between Cassandra and Alexios, and some spoilers ahead. But Cassandra and Alexios aren't just swapped sexes of the same character, but as it turns out, they are siblings, meaning if you pick one, the other becomes your demos. In the lore of the series, Cassandra is the canon sibling. Canon meaning she's like the official or even correct character. This is why we see Cassandra show up in Valhalla, or even represented as such, the Eagle Bearer, in her Magic the Gathering card. And gamers, despite being pandered to, found the thought of a female protagonist in their sacred ancient Greece just wrong. Based on records, a female Spartan would have had some sort of self-defense training as a child, which we see Cassandra do in a cutscene. She later grows up on the fringes of society anyway. She is not a soldier. She is a mercenary. She's not really following the social norms, so she could have been any gender and have it make sense. When we look at Valhalla, though, this is where things just get goofy, on the gamer's end anyway. Again, some spoilers ahead. I get to finally say it though. Male Eivor does not exist. There's no such thing as male Eivor. But let me explain. Valhalla being the second game to introduce the whole choosing your sex, this time around pandering hard to the men. We have female Eivor and male Eivor. Eivor is female. She just is. And this is where the spoilers come in. Male Eivor is just her Isu for Civ past life. The canon option for Valhalla is actually the option letting the animus decide. So you can see both of them in their correct roles. Female in the late 800s and male in the whole past life dream sequences. This is why I call male Eivor Havi and only Havi, because that was his given name in these sequences, but you may better know him as Odin. Again, these are things that will make more sense in a deep dive video, but my gods, it wasn't just Eivor being a woman that's upsetting to gamers, but NPC Norse women also fighting in my manly Viking utopia? On that alone, gamers called the game fantasy. Armchair history gamers really have the Norse all wrong, thinking they're these bloodthirsty, male-dominated barbarians. While based on what we do know, they were more like honor-bound warrior poets that held a fairly egalitarian society for the time. And I really wish I could get into more detail right now, but like I said, one day there will be a deep dive on Valhalla, so for now we'll just keep it as brief as we can. Norse women could divorce, own land, and usually were the ones in charge of the finances. And these stories of Norse having women fighters have to come from somewhere. I mean, there have been Norse grave sites where we have found what are most likely female skeletons buried with weapons amongst their male counterparts. Just look up the Burka grave site. Even if she wasn't a warrior, it would seem that she was most likely a respected strategist. A lot of people have this issue where they look at the past with this patriarchal Christian lens, and really emphasizing the Christian part. This is something that could have its own whole video, and I do plan to expand on later. The way that they view the past has even bled into gaming circles. Another reason our armchair historians will often say how the newer Assassin's Creed games are fantasy is because of what they refer to as mythology. These games are just mythology games now to them, which is just such a weird way to look at people interacting with their religions. When you think of one of these gamer types, do you think of that Reddit edgy atheist type? And I don't mean like a normal atheist. What I mean are the ones that are so up their own ass that they think they are so smart and advanced for not having a religion, yet in their anti-religion crusade, they only ever seem to focus on Abrahamic religions and forget that polytheism exists at all. If you don't, then I am so sorry that this is a new type of man I have introduced you to. But I say this with reason. So many of these gamers look at polytheist religions as just mythology and nothing more. For some reason, they cannot comprehend the fact that yes, people did in fact worship gods like Anubis, Zeus, and Thor. Some still do even. And this is where things can get so frustrating. Let's look at Origins for an example. There is a scene in Origins where you fight the giant snake Apep. And out of context, that sounds weird for an Assassin's Creed game. Well, what if I told you the whole thing is Bayek is forced to drink some sort of drug-like concoction that forces him to once again go through a reoccurring nightmare that he's been having. It's a dream sequence. Is it only bad because of the religious aspects? The weighing of the heart, basically taking on Ra's role in fighting Apep, this dream gives you so much insight into the character, showing the fear he has over his own soul as he persists in his personal crusade. Well, I mean, if that dream sequence is bad, then we have to hate the one from Assassin's Creed 3, where Connor talks to Juno through the Isu crystal ball, or the dream sequence we played through in Black Flag, or Arno's absinthe-filled revelation in Unity. We've played through dream sequences before. We play through them in Valhalla. Eivor has these dreams of her past life as the Isu Odin, aka Havi. She is unaware of her past life at this point in the game. She doesn't know that these are in fact memories, so instead she sees the memories as a religious experience. She thinks Odin is trying to tell her something through these dreams. So there is in fact an in-lore reason for these so-called fantasy elements. Oh, and the same thing for the Dawn of Ragnarok DLC. We get to experience Eivor's dreams by her doing some sort of hallucinogenic mix. Drugs come into play for a lot of elements written off in Valhalla. Eivor, being my favorite mushroom girly, eats quite a few mind-altering shrooms to gain some sort of otherworldly wisdom. Drugs are a good realistic way to show more crazy things the human mind can construct. Like in the Wrath of the Druids DLC, Eivor inhales drugs from the Druids and starts to see their wolves as werewolves, which, by the way, the Norse did in fact have a concept of a werewolf. The name scheme is more for us. Oh, but surely Odyssey is fantasy. It has mythical creatures. Look, it's just like Isu artifacts and technology. Just day one kind of stuff. Everyone is so hung up on dream sequences and Isu tech and ignoring the reasons and explanations for it just to prove the new ones are bad because they're fantasy, which is just wild. I mean, ghosts are canon, and I'm not just talking about the ghosts you see through the bleeding effect. I mean ghosts. How do you explain Ezio seeing Altair in Revelations? No one's talking about that. Okay, the point is, the more fantastical elements we see in the series always come with an explanation that makes sense with the internal lore of the games. Nothing goes against what we've seen in older titles. I wasn't sure where else to put this, but I wanted to throw in that one of the experts they brought in for Valhalla has a YouTube channel. His name is Jackson Crawford, and he seems like a cool guy. He also loved working on the game. I recommend his video on the movie The Northman. Just really give that one a watch. But getting back on track. As I go through each game in detail, not only will I get to flesh out these points, but we get to do so much more. Though, here's another misconception I want to squash real quick, just because it's something I see misunderstood over and over again, and it just kind of bugs me. Some spoilers ahead for Valhalla. Eivor is Havi, and Basim is Loki. In Valhalla, showing Havi as a separate person from Eivor with her internal dialogue was more of an artistic choice, just so it's easier for us to understand. They are the same person. Same life continued through two different bodies. Same case with Basim and Loki. And spoilers for Mirage, Basim is tormented by a djinn which plays a similar role to Eivor's dreams. The djinn represents Basim's PTSD from being imprisoned back when he was Loki. These memories that Basim doesn't understand now torment him through a lens that is more tangible for him. Nihal is again a more artistic representation of how Basim sees this past life of his, how this different side of him manifests. But Loki is not separate from Basim, and I see this mistake a lot. Think of it as a case of amnesia, or something like that. Loki lived, and then is reborn as Basim. Basim, though, must recover these memories of a life once lived, and once he does, Basim becomes whole. His whole self coming together, he is Loki. While I do understand the dislike of microtransactions, I do feel like the Healing Store is one of the less egregious examples, being that it's just full of cosmetics you don't need, and some extra leveling and materials for those who perhaps lack the time to put in hours upon hours of gameplay. And I'm only bringing this up because of gamers complaining about the more fantasy outfits you can buy. I think a lot of the time people forget that the history segments are still looked through the veil of the Animus, so the Helix store is supposed to be more seen as mods. Layla has been known to mod the Animus in some cases. I think that's a good place to wrap things up. Again, this video is more of a broad overview of things. With each deep dive, I plan to do more homework, explain things in more detail. I tried to keep this as brief as I could, but I'm not known for brevity when it comes to Assassin's Creed. I was thinking about starting the series with the OG Assassin's Creed and maybe going in order from there, but if you'd rather me start with the newer ones and go backwards, or even perhaps go from Assassin's Creed 1 to Mirage, then 2, and then Valhalla, I don't know. I'm open to recommendations on that. I'll talk about all of them eventually anyway, so I really don't mind where I start. If you made it this far, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it, and hopefully you got something out of it. I know people come to YouTube to get opinions, and I'm really not trying to do that. I more so want to share my thoughts and open a more constructive dialogue. But hopefully I've piqued some curiosity, and maybe I'll see you around for the next one. Safety and peace.